This is Akashvani. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on strengthening India's bilateral ties with France and UAE. The participants are GULSHAN SACHDEVA, Strategic Analyst, and Elizabeth Roche, Associate Professor of International Relations.
Professor Sachdeva, the Prime Minister's visit to France, the ongoing visit that is, this is happening very close after the Prime Minister's very successful visit to the United States. What does this say about India's rising global profile and role in today's world, which is a world which is very much in flux?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the whole world order is in transition. In fact, the whole world order was in transition many, many years. But two things which has happened is, one was the pandemic and the second, the Ukraine war. And as a result, I think, the whole process has accelerated. Still do not know what kind of new world order would be, but whatever the new world order is going to be, I think India is going to play a very significant role. This is very clear to, I think, all major powers. Still, we are not member of the UN Security Council, but at the same time, India is, as a very important member of so many other groupings, including G20, which we are having presidency responsibility this year. At the same time, the Indian economy is one of the largest economies now, roughly about fifth economy in the world, and it's likely to be third economy in the next few years, and maybe after a few decades, maybe second economy in the world. That's what all the projections are. But those are projections, things may go wrong. But one thing is quite clear, that India is a very big economy, now the most populous country in the world, obviously is going to play a very important role in global affairs. And India was always a big country. India was always a democracy. But one thing which has also changed the scenario in the last 10, 15 years, the kind of sustained high growth. As a result of this, it's a large economy, large market, and also because of the tensions which we can see, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, for many countries, India is also very important, kind of a defense market. So all major powers, including the United States, France, and any other countries, they are looking at India in much more respect than what it used to be earlier.
When you're looking at today's events, the 14th of July, now the Prime Minister is on a very specific occasion, if I can put it like that. This is, the Bastille Day celebration. This is a very rare honor, isn't it, for, India, and in that sense for Prime Minister Modi to be representing India at the Bastille Day celebrations, because he is one of the rare guests to be invited, especially by President Macron, because I believe in 2017, you had President Donald Trump, the then President of the United States, who was, the guest of honor at the Bastille Day celebrations. And this year it is the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi. And if you're looking at it from another context, it's also 25 years of the India-France strategic partnership. If you look at these 2 points together, what are your thoughts right now?
Well, this obviously signifies importance of India in global affairs. At the same time, also importance of Indo-French relations. The Bastille Day, as you rightly mentioned, this is a very important day for, it's a national day for France. And this is also marks, very pivotal kind of movement in the French history. And inviting any particular foreign guest as a chief guest of the Bastille Day itself is a huge significant movement. Now, India, as you know, Dr. Manmohan Singh was invited in 2009, and now again we have Prime Minister Modi invited this year. And like in our Republic Day, we invite chief guests every year. But in French Bastille Day, it's not that every year they have chief guests there.
Special guest.
Special guests. Sometimes they have more than one chief guest also. And, we have, of course, the strategic partnership with France, but, this strategic partnership is also very special. And India today has more than 35 strategic partnerships. But you remember, France was the first country with whom the India signed strategic partnership in 1998. So the time when, just a few months later, India also conducted, the Pokhran nuclear test. That point of time, France not only refrained from imposing sanctions, but that time, the French President Jacques Chirac, he also wanted to, in fact, resolve India's exclusion from the global nuclear framework. So since then, the last 25 years now, if you can see, there is a very strong institutional mechanism which has been established. And if you look at since then, the cooperation in the areas of space, you also have in defense, in civil nuclear, in the now particularly in the renewable sector, in the cyberspace, in digital technology, counter-terrorism, and of course, 2 years back, we also had a joint statement on blue economy. And of course, we are also working very closely in maritime security areas. And all the three services, our defense services, they also conduct kind of regular exercises. And we also jointly launched the International Solar Alliance. So it means, many things have been happening now, and any observer will tell you that this is one of the very special partnership we have. And now since we are celebrating 25 years, and there are reports that at the end of this visit, we might have another roadmap for another next 25 years. So it means the partnership, which was already very strong, and it's also a kind of a trusted partnership, it's going to be strengthened further with this particular visit and the honor given to India.
You mentioned a very interesting fact, which I'm sure some people, of course, would remember, which is basically that then French President Jacques Chirac did not condemn India's nuclear tests. This was in 1998, as you pointed out. Now, in a way, I'd like to put it to you that, both India and France have been following an independent foreign policy, or at least a different foreign policy, not being camp followers. India has something which it exercises called strategic autonomy. France also has an independent line of thinking when it comes to foreign policy. So there is a lot of similarity between India and France, right? When you're looking at the world, India, of course, looks at it from Asia because we are situated in Asia. France looks at it from Europe, where it is situated. But there is a lot of similarity, multipolarity for one. India and France both look for multipolarity. So what are your thoughts on this?
One thing is quite clear that, unlike India, France is very much part of European security architecture, at the same time also European economic architecture. So economically, they're very much integrated within the EU economy and all the institutional framework of this. Similarly, they also work within the NATO framework, which is led by the United States. But of course, France also has always ambition to have a very independent foreign policy. And particularly, this has been asserted by President Macron again in many of the speeches in the last couple of years, that the Europe has to take much more responsibility. Because in fact, I think if you go back to the French history, like President Gaulle and also with like the President, Mitterrand, President Macron also seems to believe that a strong and united Europe could be used as a kind of tool to improve French position in world affairs. At one point of time, sometimes they have been in NATO and they were also out NATO. And then they also had, particularly when the United States was taking kind of unilateral decisions, look at Iraq war and some of the other instances. And even President Macron sometimes has been criticized in the last few years, the way kind of it's seen by the other Western players as a soft handling of both China and Russia by France. So France is trying to kind of assert a kind of independent foreign policy for France, at the same time also as a result of this kind of taking leadership of the Europe. Because now, when Chancellor Merkel was there, she was a kind of a de facto leader of Europe. Now she has retired, she's out of the scene now. And since then, Brexit has also happened. So France is the only country which has nuclear weapons, which also has the membership of the United Nations Security Council. So they have an ambition to play a very important role. But that's the kind of ambition you can see again and again. But to say what we have seen during the Ukraine war, when there was a kind of a crisis, serious crisis, still they have to go back to that transatlantic alliance. And America, as you can see, they are also playing a very important role in this Ukraine war as well. But you have asked is that's also, there is a certain validity of this point that India also believes a multipolar world. At the same time, we also, the way we have, conducted our foreign policy during the Ukraine war, it has become, our relations with the West, particularly the United States and Europe, has become very strong in the last 10 years or so. At the same time, we took very different position on the Ukraine war, what was perhaps expected by United States and Europe. So there is a certain similarity, as you rightly mentioned, kind of a desire to lead a very independent foreign policy. Now, India is not a part of any alliance, so we always believed in independent foreign policy and we conduct in the same manner. Now, France has a certain restriction because, as I said, they are very much part of the European and transatlantic security alliance. So within that, also, still they are trying to have kind of chart out a independent foreign policy or strategic autonomy, as you can call for France and also for Europe.
Now, if we come to the takeaways from the Prime Minister's visit to France, one of the takeaways we are looking at is from the defense sector. Now, news reports have spoken about Rafale aircraft for the Indian Navy, 3 more Scorpion submarines to be built in India, and there are some other deals also possible in the pipeline. This strengthens the traditional India-France defense, the strategic pillar, which is the defense part of it, right? The thing is, we both have interest in the Indo-Pacific. So a strengthening of India-France defense partnership, how does it impact the Indo-Pacific and the challenges that are there in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, India-France defense cooperation started much before the Indo-Pacific narrative. We started, buying many of the defense equipment from France many years back. But of course, the turning point, as you rightly mentioned, was earlier the Rafale deal when we bought earlier one, and now of course there are reports which indicate we will come to know soon of another deal of 26 Rafale and also 3 submarines and other defense stuff, which likely to be something about 90,000 crore. That's what some of the reports indicate. Now, this obviously strengthened our defense partnership, and anyway, this has been very close. Now, on the issue of not just only the Indo-Pacific, we have been also cooperating earlier in the broader Indian Ocean region. But now, of course, within the context of Indo-Pacific, both India and France, since they are resident powers within the Indo-Pacific, and within the Indo-Pacific, everybody has realized that India plays a very crucial role because of India's role within the Indian Ocean particularly. And if you look at all the Indo-Pacific strategies now coming from France, from Germany, from Netherlands, and also from the European Union, and the recent one from the Czech Republic, so all European countries are also kind of focusing on the Indo-Pacific region for 2 reasons. One is, of course, for them, the most important reason is that this region is going to be economically very dynamic region in the coming decades. So they do have very significant presence here, and they would like to preserve their economic presence in this region. And with that, they find that they can also partner a country like India. And then, of course, there are also strategic component to that, and particularly the maritime security aspect of this. Now, all these issues bring India and France together. And there is also, in fact, they have also worked out particularly on the blue economy sector. So all these issues, and then further linking even with the sustainable development goals in the Pacific region. So it's not just only about certain strategic aspects we are looking here in the Indo-Pacific with a country like France. Since there is a convergence of both economic and strategic concerns, both India and France, so they are working on a large number of issues from strategy to blue economy to sustainable development goals and the economic issues within the Indo-Pacific. And we have seen many of those activities happening together in the last many years.
I'm sure the Prime Minister's visit to France, earlier the Prime Minister's visit to the US and now the Prime Minister's visit to France is being followed very carefully by countries in our region. I will take names and I will say China, for example, would be watching this visit very carefully, both the visits to the US and France. If you were an observer, an analyst in China, what would be the most interesting or strategic, if I can put it like that, elements of the visit to France? What would, for you, if you were in China, what would be the most interesting elements of the Prime Minister's visit to France?
Our relation, as you know, with China has not been as officially called normal in the last few years. But at the same time, I think the challenge for everyone is really how to manage your relations with China. But the question you asked how the Chinese would be looking this particular, the event particular of Prime Minister visit to the United States and also now to France, and not just only the visit to France, but also participation, the Bastille Day celebrations, at the same time also buying more defense equipment if that happens at the end of the visit. Now, they obviously would be watching carefully, and they would also would like to analyze in a sense that, what does really it means? How do they deal with another very important rising power within Asia, which is India? So if our relations are not really normal, the rise of both China and India in Asia is in a sense is an opportunity for both India and China, because these are two large economies growing at a reasonably respectable growth rate and likely to grow at least for the next 10-15 years at a relatively high growth rate. So these two economies, if they work together, they can actually feed each other, because they can actually provide very important markets for each other. But if there are tensions between India and China, then obviously India may not really be, because of our own independent foreign policy, may not be aligned with the United States or other Western power, but of course we'll be becoming more and more strengthening our partnerships with the Western powers. And in the last particularly few years, another thing also which has happened is China's rise has also happened earlier. The kind of technology and investment which they received from the United States, and they also received a lot of investment, and also very important the export market and also import market for the Europeans as well, and many of the European countries have also invested in China. So in the last few years, the theme was that the last 3 or 4 years, both United States and also Europe, they wanted to decouple from China. Now the recent trend is that since those economies are so interlinked with each other, now they want to de-risk rather than decouple, because decoupling is not really possible now. This is because the links are too strong. So China also would like India also to be kind of integrated in that sense with the Chinese orbit, as they have done with other South Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries. But India, as you know, we have seen also even in the SCO summit, even if we were together, India did not endorse the Chinese BRI. We have certain reservations because of our, the border issue, tension with China. But China is watching very, very carefully all these developments. At one level, they also would like certain normalcy with India, so they can have, normal kind of economic relationship, because Indian market provides a very important source for them in the long run, because Indian economy will be important economy, neighborhood. At the same time, they are also worried that within Asia, if there is also another important country and a very big country is also rising, that also has worries from the Chinese point of view. But India is trying to now, no country stopped China's rise, but countries are trying to balance particularly the assertive behavior of China by working together, cooperating with other partners. This is what India has been doing through different platforms which we have seen in the last few years, including Quad. So Chinese are at one level, they are working with us. We are also members together with BRICS, with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and also with within the Russia, China, India trilateral. But at the same time, there are certain tensions. So there are areas where there is a possibility of cooperation between India and China. Because China is still a very important trading partner of India. So every country is in fact trying to learn from each other. We are trying to learn from Europe how they are dealing with China. Europe is also trying to learn from India how we are dealing with China, in what manner. But of course, we are in different geographies. They do not have the kind of strategic tensions what we have because of the border issue. But still, I think the cooperation with others is very useful way to kind of, manage China's rise within Asia.
Right. So if you're looking at newer areas of cooperation, what would you say are the newer areas? Because defense is definitely one of the sectors, but then that's been, as you pointed out, it's been there for a while. It's been there, it's decades old. But we have a new possibility, which is Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. So there are new possibilities even in a traditional area. Similarly, in the space, for example, space cooperation between India and France is again decades old. But we have a new opportunity today, which is basically, India has opened up its space sector, right, for private participants to join, private sector to join. So what are the newer areas you think? I mean, there's innovation, there's startups. There is a CEO's meeting going to happen, India-France CEO's meeting in Paris. What are the new areas you think which will come up after these talks?
Well, you're right. I mean, the areas like defense, civil nuclear, and cyberspace, etc. I mean, we have been working, and also on counterterrorism, we have been working for quite some time now. And in the last few years, I think the areas where a lot of action is taking place. One is in the renewables, where we have, jointly launched this International Solar Alliance. And since we also have very ambitious targets to be achieved by 2030 and later, by 2070, and there are all kind of new green technologies which are coming from Europe and also from France. So this is one area one would really expect a lot of action in the next few years. Then another area is about the blue economy. How within the Indo-Pacific region, this already has been identified, but a lot of new projects really have to work in this area. And then all in particular in the digital public goods. This is one area which I think, again, some new actions I think one would like to see in the coming years. And of course, we also can work together in third countries, particularly the development cooperation, because French has been active in many of those countries, and India has its own program, a very successful program of development cooperation, particularly in our neighboring countries and also in Africa. So there are possibilities that India and France can work together in certain joint development projects in third countries. But the important point is that our relations are very strong. There is a very strong strategic convergence now you can see between India and France, and particularly with the defense matters, things are becoming even stronger. But if you look at our trade and economics, now that's one area which is, I would say, still a lot of work need to be done. Because if you look at so what kind of, particularly the mercantile trade, what we have in the last few years between India and France. So somewhere between 10 to 12 billion trade we have. Now, if you look at the French economy, which is, close to 3 trillion economy, which is just slightly smaller than the Indian economy, is a huge economy. And if you look at our trade numbers, if you look at some of the neighboring countries, look at Bangladesh, look at Thailand, Malaysia, our trade is larger in these countries even, compared to France. So if we are trading more with Thailand or with Vietnam than France, then it means something needs to be done here, because it's a huge economy. There's huge opportunities. And in a country like France, you can also have, both kind of products, very high-end products and also other products where we have a traditional comparative advantage. But, the problem has been that, now since France is also part of the European Union, so the competency on trade matters is not really with France. So there you have to work with the European Union. And with the EU, we've been discussing this, free trade agreement since 2007. But now, when Prime Minister Modi met 27 leaders in 2021, after that, the renegotiation has started. Few rounds of negotiations have already taken place. Earlier, we were kind of negotiating on a comprehensive trade agreement. Now we have one specific agreement on trade, and then you also have a separate one on investment, and the third one on geographical indicators. But, so it means we really need to hurry up some of those issues, because otherwise the kind of opportunities we have in the French economy, we may not be able to kind of realize it. Similarly, with the French companies, of course, they are doing, almost all major French companies are in India. And we also see that, a couple of months back, the Air India also gave very big order of something, 250 aircrafts to Airbus. So it means the Indian market is huge. So they are able to sell a lot of stuff to Indian market, particularly in the specific areas. But that can really need to be broadened. And perhaps in certain ways, we also have to work with the European Union on those trade negotiations. Then perhaps there'll be many more opportunities. But these are areas, particularly renewables and blue economy and the digital area. These are the areas there'll be, I would say, or green technologies. There'll be a lot of action in the next few years, one can see, apart from the traditional areas.
You mentioned counterterrorism. Now, that's a very interesting area of cooperation. And the reason why I mentioned that is because if you look at the kind of cooperation between India and France, especially in the UN Security Council, when it comes to terrorism-related issues, now that's been particularly strong, right? I mean, what is the driving force behind this counter-terrorism cooperation?
Well, the driving force is that broader strategic objectives, you would see that there is a convergence. There are, of course, specifics. in India, we live in a different kind of neighborhood. They also have experience in handling some of those issues. So I think a lot of cooperation is happening in those areas. And since they are also member of the UN Security Council, so some of the issues when they happen at the UNSC security issues, so there also we have been able to work together. So in different ways, actually, we have worked on counterterrorism. But of course, our issues within our own neighborhood, there are issues in France. They have a relatively different kind of issues because in the past, there were also many incidents of terrorism in France and also in Europe. So within Europe, they're also having cooperation on the counterterrorism measures. So we are working both at the EU level and also with France on many of those issues and also at the global level, both at the UNSC and also in G20 and other forums.
Right. Before we conclude, we must talk about, the second leg of the Prime Minister's tour, which is basically a visit to the UAE. Now, India-UAE relationship is one that has seen huge and dramatic upswing, if I can put it like that, in the past since 2015. So how do you look at the Prime Minister's visit to the UAE? The ties have strengthened dramatically. Where is the trajectory of this relationship going?
Well, this is one area which has always been, again, a very important area for India for two reasons. One is UAE is very important trading partner of India. At the same time, huge Indian diaspora there. And of course, for the energy issues. So these three issues, your trade, energy and diaspora, which are bringing India and UAE together. And now since our relations with the United States have also improved and other European countries, so now in some of the forums we are working together with the US, UAE and France. So there are certain minilaterals which has also been formed. So in the last few years, this relationship was very important, but suddenly it has been transformed and it has become really so important issue, so close to us, and three or four issues which are really important as far as the India-UAE is concerned.
Right. This meeting with the UAE leadership is going to be, the fifth high-level meeting between our Prime Minister and the UAE leadership. One of the things which I believe is going to be, top of the agenda is, renewable energy, the energy transition, climate change. These are the issues which are going to come up. How important is it for the India-UAE relationship to look at these elements? Because, yes, I understand UAE is hosting the COP28. So how important are these issues going to be in the bilateral agenda?
And, this is very interesting because, traditionally one wouldn't have really imagined that countries in this region, in the Gulf region, would become very important players or at least would like to think very seriously about renewable issues because there is abundance of other fossil fuels in those areas. But suddenly they have also realized that one, of course, is the global climate issues, and the second is that these resources are not infinite. So ultimately, they also have to make the transition to a different kind of economy, which is one, sustainable. Second thing is not really dependent on fossil resources because this is what mostly the dependent has been in the past. So here, because the issue is becoming important, and then now this meeting, as you mentioned, the COP28 meeting is going to take place in UAE. So within that context, I think their both leadership would definitely, this issue would be important, renewable, apart from the traditional issues of concern between India and UAE.
Right. So all in all, I think the important parts of our discussion were basically that the Prime Minister's visit to France and the UAE will be very rich in substance and will be setting new benchmarks for, the strategic partnership with both countries. Professor SACHDEVA, thank you very much for this discussion.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
You were listening to a discussion on strengthening India's bilateral ties with France and UAE. The participants were GULSHAN SACHDEVA, Strategic Analyst, and Elizabeth Roche, Associate Professor of International Relations. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 92890 94044.